Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For more than 26 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. In recent years, more and more people have become concerned that giant corporations are doing things to food that we eat that are bad for our health, bad for agricultural animals, and bad for the environment. A few giant corporations are tampering with the genetic makeup of food, crops such as corn and soy especially. They are splicing into these food crops some genes from totally different species, sometimes splicing genes from bacteria into plants to kill weeds or to make plants grow faster. The changed crops are referred to as genetically modified, GM, or genetically engineered, GE. Scientists are increasingly warning us of the dangers of this. While some aspects of the science are detailed, ordinary people can easily understand the basic facts. I'm delighted to welcome Sandra Lee as our guest for the next hour. Sandra is a scientist with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. For several years, she has been educating herself about genetically modified organisms. She's skilled at explaining the science clearly in ways that ordinary folks can understand. Sandra is providing some visual images to illustrate the facts that she'll be sharing with us during this hour. Welcome, Sandra. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Glenn.
And I'm glad we finally get to address this topic. It's been on my list of topics I wanted to get to for some time, and I'm glad we're doing it now. Later in this interview, we'll talk some more about dangers that genetically modified foods cause for human health. But first, could you give like an overview of some of the dangers so viewers will see the scope of the problems?
The United States Food and Drug Administration has developed an official policy about genetically modified foods, but before they did that, the scientists at the FDA expressed real concerns about the potential for dangers associated with genetically modified organisms. They said that there was potential for new allergies, new toxins, new diseases, and new nutritional problems resulting from this whole genetic engineering technology. So they were very concerned. We're going to show as we go along some slides, some images that show you some of the lab animals that have been affected by the genetically engineered foods that they've been fed during the lab studies.
A starting point for this would be what people assume or believe about food. For example, a lot of people assume that if the government allows something to be sold, that it must be safe. And what would your response be to that assumption?
I have this fundamental belief that I suppose, that the government is going to take care of us, right? That if anything is going to be on the shelf available for us to buy, that it's going to be safe, that it's going to be something that we can eat and have it be something that is not damaging to us and to our health. I have come to a point where I no longer trust that. That trust has been broken for me, and I believe there are a lot of people out there who have educated themselves who, again, no longer have that trust or that faith.
So in recent years, you're not alone.
Yes.
There are more of us who are well-informed, who've looked into this, have lost that assumption, as you have. And people have lost faith in the food industry. Is there anything else you could say about this, about that loss of trust?
I think it's a real problem. I mean, the average person out there who doesn't know about the things that are going on with all of this, they just go around buying their food as they always have, not aware that there is a potential problem with it. But now more and more people are starting to be concerned and educating themselves and other people about this. So people are more informed now.
And they'll be even more informed at the end of this hour.
We hope so.
There's something called the precautionary principle that is very useful in so many areas of modern life where science is saying, oh, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And the precautionary principle, can you describe what that is and how that is relevant to this topic?
The precautionary principle basically says, if you're going to change something, if you're going to do something new, do no harm. So if you are feeding your family and you know that something has the potential to cause damage to health, then it's like, oh, there's a potential for harm for that, so you're not going to do it. In a business that you own, if you're going to look at adopting a new policy, if it's going to have potential to cause harm, you're probably not going to implement that. So the precautionary principle basically says to do no harm with what you're doing.
Yeah, so don't do something if you can't anticipate what the outcomes are going to be.
Yes.
If it's, I mean, don't be like recklessly gambling.
Yeah.
If you don't know this is going to be safe.
And in our society, we count on scientific studies to be able to provide that evidence, to provide that proof.
Well, let's talk a bit about the scientific method then, because how do scientists work through the scientific method to figure out how the world works?
They come up with a hypothesis, something that they decide they want to prove, a theory that they have that they want to believe is true. And so they develop scientific experiments to test that assumption, to test that hypothesis. The way the scientific method works is if there is even one piece of evidence, one piece of scientific evidence showing that that hypothesis is false, then the whole hypothesis is false. Because if the hypothesis is true, then it has to be true in all cases. So we're going to see that there are examples of places where genetically modified foods have caused harm, which disproves that hypothesis that they're safe.
So has there been enough scientific experimentation to prove one way or another about the safety of genetically modified foods?
In my opinion, there's been enough to prove that it's not safe, because again, there's more than one study showing that it's dangerous. But unfortunately, there aren't a lot of safety studies required. In my opinion,
not required by the government.
There should be requirements for safety studies done before these things are approved, and after they're out in the market, they should continue to be studied. But none of those safety tests are required.
Some of the best research and explanation of what's going on comes from a nonprofit group called the Institute for Responsible Technology, and I've read their stuff and appreciate very much what they're doing. Jeffrey Smith had started this. He wrote a book called Genetic Roulette, and we'll have the website and information at the end of the program in the credit. Among other things, they expose how the genetically modified food industry rigs its own scientific research to distort the results. Can you tell us how that works?
I want to clarify. The Institute for Responsible Technology doesn't actually do any research.
No, but
what they do is they gather information.
They convey the information,
So the way scientific studies can be manipulated, you can come up with whatever result you want the study to show. You can cause the scientific experiment to be designed such a way that shows the result that you want it to show. And a lot of times what they also do is they manipulate the numbers. They manipulate the result after the studies have happened, again, to show whatever it is that they want to show. So you can't really trust the studies that the industry does to show safety, because they're not wanting to prove that they're safe.
Right, they have a conflict of interest. They want to they want to be able to sell their stuff.
Yes.
So we need independent research.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Food and Drug Administration doesn't require that they do safety studies, and the Food and Drug Administration doesn't do their own safety studies.
Right. Now, tell us about Michael Taylor and the revolving door. We hear about revolving door between people who come from an industry, they get a job with the government they're supposed to regulate, and then they're actually, you know, they've got a conflict of interest in this revolving door between industry and the government and back. Tell us about Michael Taylor.
Michael Taylor is an excellent example of that. So he used to be an attorney for Monsanto, and then he was also one of their vice presidents. And George Bush, the presidential administration, decided they wanted to promote biotechnology. And so they created a position for Michael Taylor in the Food and Drug Administration, where he was in charge of developing and FDA's policy about genetically modified foods. Now the Obama administration has installed him as the food safety czar. So this Monsanto executive is now responsible for our food safety.
Yeah, so it's a bipartisan problem. It's not like you can just pin it on one party or another. In England, United Kingdom, the scientist that was most knowledgeable about genetically modified food was a fellow named Arpad Pusztai, and he conducted a study. Tell us what happened. Tell us his story.
Arpad Pusztai is considered to be the expert in feeding studies. So he develops the protocols for feeding whatever it is that they're testing to animals to test whether or not they're safe. And so he developed a genetically modified potato for the purposes of these experiments, and he fed rats these genetically modified potatoes. He had 3 groups of rats. One group of rats had the genetically modified potatoes. Another group of rats had plain potatoes that the pesticide got added to, and then the third group of rats had plain potatoes. Okay, so all 3 groups of rats had a balanced diet other than that, but they got these potatoes. So the group that ate the genetically modified potatoes had potentially precancerous cell growth in the digestive tract, smaller brains, livers and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and damaged immune systems. And all of that damage in the rats occurred within 10 to 110 days. So you're talking about 4 months. This pretty serious damage had occurred to those rats. Now, the group of rats that ate the potatoes that had the pesticide added to it were not damaged. The only group of rats that was affected was the group that ate the genetically modified potato.
So it wasn't just the pesticide itself.
It's not the pesticide.
It's the genetic modification
Yes.
of the potato that this was.
Yes, it's the technology itself that causes the damage in the plant that creates the problems. That's the theory.
Now, you can show us a visual image?
Yes. So we've got a slide here of the stomach lining of rats who were fed non-genetically modified potato and genetically modified potato. And you can see that on the side where the genetically modified potato tissue is, that those cells are larger, that it's called cell proliferation. So the cells have overgrown on the side where the genetically modified potato, that's the rats who ate the genetically modified potato. The whole reason why we have this in the first place is because they say that the genetically modified and non-genetically modified are the same.
That's the FDA policy.
Yes, that they say that they are substantially equivalent, that there's no difference in the plant, that there's no difference in the effect of eating the plant on the animals or on the people who eat it, right? So if we look at these 2 tissues, if they're the same, if the genetically modified and non-genetically modified are the same, there should be no difference in effect on the tissues. And yet you see this potentially precancerous growth in the tissues of the cells of the stomach.
Okay, tell us about the Seralini rat feeding study.
I have another slide before that.
Oh, okay.
So we have one that shows the testicles of rats who were fed genetically modified food. And again, you see that the color is different and the cell structure and the function are different. Now we'll talk about the Seralini rat study.
Okay.
So these are images that have been very recently shown widely on the internet. The results of this study have been published relatively recently, showing the dramatic effects that were in these animals. These animals, this was the first study that was done with animals where they were fed the genetically modified, I believe it was corn, over the course of their lifetime. right? So it's like most studies that have been very short in duration. You saw Dr. Pustai's rats show those impacts on their cells in 4 months, right? So these rats were fed the genetically modified corn over the course of their lifetime. This was done in France. And you can see the massive tumors that these poor rats suffer. The female rats had more problems than the male rats.
Now, there's another study with rats dying soon after eating genetically modified.
Yeah, so there is another study that was done in Russia. A senior scientist did this study where she took rats, female rats, and she fed them genetically modified soy before they conceived, after they conceived, and then during birth and lactation, right? So they fed them the genetically modified soy all throughout this time where they were having babies. And they found that over 50% of the rats died within the first 3 weeks after they were born.
And the comparison on the slide shows the control group, the ones that were eating normal food,
Yes.
had a very
About
low
10%.
rate, less than 10%.
So big difference. Over 50% died in 3 weeks for the genetically modified and about 10% for the non-GMO soy. So a big impact on the rats. And there's another slide of these rats. If you look at these groups of babies, okay, the group on the upper slide shows all the rats. They all look the same, first of all, and it's a nice little family.
Yeah, they
They're
all look
socialized.
healthy.
They all look healthy. They're happy. They're peaceful, the way rats should be.
Yeah.
But if you look at the genetically modified food-fed rats, those rats are all different. I mean, they look awful.
Yeah.
They look sickly.
Yeah.
They're also aggressive. They climb the walls of their cages. They're very, very non-normal
Yeah,
rat behavior.
they're not interacting in a friendly, collaborative way like the ones on top.
Yes, and if we look at our society now, I mean, how many more problems are we having with violent behavior, you know, mental illness, depression, all those sorts of things? Who knows if those are contributed to by the GMOs?
Now, chromosomes and DNA are the blueprint for everything that lives. And some people assume that it's okay to manipulate DNA as if they were like playing with Lego blocks or something, and then engineer the DNA in various ways without danger or risk. What's your response to that notion?
What they do is they take a section of DNA from something that has the quality that they want, and they add it into the DNA of the target plant, just assuming that it's all going to work nicely. They're just going to stick it in, and it's going to work exactly the way I want it to, and it's not going to affect anything else.
And these are often very different species.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bacteria in plants, some other animal in a plant. I mean, they do all sorts of bizarre things.
Yeah. Now, tell us about the diagram that shows DNA and protein.
Yes. So we have a plant
Okay.
that has whatever property it is that they want to have. And then inside the plant you have cells. Inside the cells you have the nucleus of the cell. And inside the nucleus of the cell is where the genetic material is. That's where the DNA is. The DNA is transcribed by a protein called RNA that then makes the actual protein that is the product that they eventually want. When they do this genetic engineering, what they want is they want these plants to make a special protein that gives that plant the properties that they want. So they're ultimately looking for the protein.
Okay, now when DNA or a specific gene is changed, this is called a mutation. Tell us about mutations. What do we need to know?
Mutations in DNA are basically errors that occur. And so when they do this genetic engineering, what they do is they take a section of DNA that they want and they stick it through some pretty random process, in my opinion, into a plate of cells that they want to have incorporate this new DNA. And the process of doing it creates massive collateral damage in the plant. I mean, it can be thousands of mutations occurring. You can scramble the DNA, you can take genes that make proteins that you actually want, and you can make it so they're turned on all the time, making a lot more of the protein than you really want. Or it can turn them off. It can make it so your body's supposed to make a protein and it doesn't. The plant may make proteins that have been changed in some way and don't work properly. I mean, there's all sorts of errors that can occur. And so it's just a lot of damage to the DNA of the plant.
So a lot of unexpected results.
Yes.
Yeah. So what, how does that, what else do we need to know? What's the next step in?
Well, So DNA came about over the course of a very long time. I mean, our DNA is very precise in how it's put together. And if you go and you change it, it's really unknown what the result is going to be. So that's what they're doing with these plants. They're just changing the DNA of something that has grown to be that way because that's the way the plant needs it to be.
Now, go ahead.
And there's a lot of potential damage that can occur.
Now, you've done some study of how proteins function, the shape of proteins and how they fold. Tell us about that.
When you change the DNA, you change the protein. So proteins are made up of amino acids. There's a whole range of amino acids that you see in this image here. And you can see that each of those amino acids has a different structure. So you can see that some of them have rings, some of them are small, some of them are larger, and each of those amino acids has a certain way that they are shaped. So this shows the shapes of 2 of the different amino acids. So when you have a protein, you have these amino acids all lined up one after the other. And the way these amino acids are shaped affects the shape of the protein. The proteins then fold themselves up to have a certain way of interacting with the things that are going on in the body or inside the plant. And the shape of those proteins is very, very important. So it's like an enzyme is a protein. Enzymes are these proteins that are in our bodies that make it so all of the functions that occur in our bodies are able to occur. And you have an enzyme here that has a certain shape. And it's like it has a substrate, a molecule that it is supposed to interact with, and it's like having a lock and a key. This protein that this protein enzyme is going to interact with, this one fits into that one like a key. If you change the shape of the protein, the enzyme or whatever the protein, if you change the key doesn't fit into the lock anymore because the lock is a different shape. So the ability of the plant or of the body to function properly is really affected when you change the shape of the proteins.
So this could cause very unanticipated and undesirable results.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll just wreak havoc basically with how the body functions, because you're not able to do the things that the proteins need to do, or the communication for enzymes to different parts of the body that need to be.
We talked earlier about how the FDA scientists said there was potential for new allergies, new toxins, new diseases, and new nutritional problems. When you put all these different proteins into the body, you don't know what's going to happen because these are foreign proteins that the body has never dealt with before.
So it's a very serious violation of the precautionary principle.
In my opinion,
You're doing
yes.
all kinds of wacky stuff with it that's dangerous.
It's like a shot in the dark.
Yeah.
It's pretty random the way they do this.
So the vast majority of some common foods are genetically modified already, especially corn and soy, cottonseed and canola, and a lot of sugar beets have been genetically modified. What can you tell us about the foods genetically modified, the extent of GM foods?
Soy, corn, cottonseed, and canola are the most common. And those are used in vegetable oils. So if your oil says it's this specific type of plant material, then that's what it is. But if it's just vegetable oil, then it's going to have some mixture of all of these in there. So that's going to be pretty much all genetically modified. Then you also have...
so like if it says olive oil, you know that's safe because that's olive oil.
Yes.
But if it just says vegetable oil, it could be anything. And if it specifies soy oil or cottonseed or canola or corn oil, it's very likely to be genetically modified.
The majority of those crops is going to be genetically modified. And then they also take the other stuff from the soy and the corn mostly, and they put it into our food in all sorts of different ways. I mean, they hide it in a whole range of different ingredients. There are forms of soy and corn. So high fructose corn syrup, by the way, is definitely
ubiquitous. It's everywhere. High fructose corn
But
syrup.
again, there's so many different ingredients that are genetically modified that are hidden forms of soy and corn.
Because they operate under some other name.
Yes.
But that's really what it means.
Yes, and then sugar beet. So if your sugar says it's 100% cane sugar, then you know it's fine. But if it just says sugar, it's probably going to have sugar beet in it.
Okay, and a lot of sugar beet is genetically modified.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you have a small amount of zucchini and crookneck squash and Hawaiian papaya. Those are all genetically modified to resist a virus. And then unfortunately, alfalfa was recently approved. And they may be putting genetically modified salmon out there sometime soon.
That's been a controversy
Yes.
raging for some time. We'll see what happens.
It's really coming up in the active now.
So now, when we started the program, you mentioned that the federal government's Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which is responsible for protecting us from dangerous food and drugs, has not been doing its job, and their policy says, well, this is really the same stuff. But you said that the scientists at the FDA had initially said, wow, watch out, this could have all kinds of recklessly dangerous results. Is there anything else you want to say to us about the FDA or their policy?
Well, so their official policy since 1992 has been, the agency is not aware of any information showing that foods derived by these new methods differ from other foods in any meaningful or uniform way. So their official policy says that they didn't know that there was a potential problem.
But that goes back to 92.
Yes. And before they developed the policy, again, that was under Michael Taylor, remember, before they developed the policy, that's when the scientists said, hey, listen, there's a potential for allergies, diseases, so they knew, they had information. And there's actually evidence showing that they had information before that policy. So they're saying we don't have any information that there's any different.
But if that's still the same policy all these couple of decades later, it means they're not paying attention, and they're saying we're willing to rest on the ignorance that we had 2 decades ago.
Well, but they didn't even have the ignorance then.
No, they knew. But they were...
They pretended to be ignorant.
Yeah, right. Let's see, is there anything else you want to say about types of genetic modifications within a plant's cells?
There are two main types of genetic modification. The first is resistance to herbicide. The most common is Roundup. Have you heard of Roundup?
Yeah,
Roundup herbicide, yes.
Yes.
So the most common type of genetic modification is resistance to application of Roundup. And what that means is that if this plant is Roundup ready, okay, it makes a protein that makes it that it can survive application of Roundup. That means that the farmers can put on as much Roundup as they want to kill the weeds, and it won't kill the plant. So they have Roundup ready soy, they put all the Roundup on they want, and then it doesn't kill the soy plant, but it kills the weeds. The next most common is that it produces its own pesticide. The most common of these is Bt toxin.
Okay.
Bt toxin is an insecticide that has been used for a long time and is considered safe. It's even considered acceptable for organic agriculture. And so the plants that make Bt toxin make the Bt toxin in every cell of the plant. So when the bug eats the plant, it gets a bite of this pesticide, and it actually tears apart their digestive system. Okay.
So let's look at this information in the context of modern farming practices. So farmers, especially the big scale farmers, have vastly increased the amounts of herbicides they spray on the fields to kill the weeds. What else do we need to know about Roundup or that kind of thing?
Because they're applying so much of this herbicide, the weeds are becoming resistant to it. So in order to kill the weeds, they're having to use more and more and more Roundup. It's reaching the point where they have increased the amount of Roundup they can use, so much so that they don't even track it anymore, I believe, because they're saying, oh, there's so much of it that we can't follow it anymore. And they're increasing the residues that are allowable in the food supply, the amount that's still in the food when you eat it.
So the government is saying it's okay to have more residue of herbicides in the food?
Because there's so much of it out there.
Yeah, so they've basically given up on regulating it.
And because it's not working anymore to kill the weeds, they're moving to even more toxic herbicides. So they're starting to use 2,4-D, which is a component of Agent Orange. They're starting to use that for killing weeds now, and they actually want to have 2,4-D resistant crops where they can start using even more of the 2,4-D.
What else do we need to know about Roundup?
So it's
Which is made by Monsanto.
Yes.
Yeah,
We've all heard about Monsanto.
Monsanto was recently voted like the most horrible corporation in the world. I don't remember the exact adjective that was used, but it was somebody had done some research, public opinion surveying about which corporations are the nastiest, and Monsanto won.
I didn't hear about that, but I'm not surprised. Yeah. So it's important to understand how at least some herbicides work. A lot of herbicides work by chelating minerals, by removing a mineral from the soil. So chelation works as you have a mineral here, and you want it to not be available to the plant or to the animal. And a chelator comes and it grabs it.
Okay.
And it makes it so it's not available.
So that's a chemical process.
Yes, a chemical process. It's like it just grabs it and doesn't let go. Okay? So there are other herbicides that just take out one mineral. This mineral, that mineral. Roundup is so effective because it chelates lots and lots. It's basically removing all of those cations. Those are mineral ions in the soil. It chelates all of those minerals out so that they're not available for the plants. So Roundup Ready, the genetic modification, works by making it possible for the plant to survive without having those minerals available to it. Roundup chelates all those minerals, makes them not available, so the minerals don't get into the plant, but the plant has to be able to survive. So plants normally draw those minerals up because it's important for their ability to grow and be healthy.
They need minerals.
We need minerals, yes. We need minerals for our health. So what happens when you remove those minerals? You make it so they're not available. The plant can't be perfectly healthy. And it also doesn't have the minerals for us to eat when we eat the plants.
So they lose nutrient value.
Yes. Now there's a whole other thing that happens. When they spray the Roundup on the plants, the Roundup gets incorporated into the material of the plant. It goes to the growth junctions and it goes to the seeds. So we eat the seeds. That's why we grow these crops, right? The soy and the corn, so we can eat the seeds. So there is Roundup in the seeds. Roundup is a chelator. So we're eating these foods that have this chelator in it, which means we get the chelator inside us. The Roundup is inside our bodies, right? And it can chelate the minerals. If you actually have the minerals, it can take them out and make them so they're not available to you.
Okay, so that would impair nutrition if you eat
Absolutely.
corn or soy that has been genetically modified, as most have been these days.
Yes, and unfortunately, Roundup is also used on a lot of other crops, right? It's used, you know, people use it on their driveways.
Yeah, I was just
people
say,
use it in their
they
gardens.
Sell it for people to use at home.
They use, yeah. So it's
everywhere.
not limited to use on genetically modified crops. It can be used in a whole range of different places. So it's all over the place. And there have now been studies done that are showing it's actually contributing to, I believe it's contributing to health impacts, health problems that people are having.
Yeah. Now, livestock eat grain. I mean, a lot of, beef animals, dairy animals, pigs, chickens, lots and lots of livestock, goats, and everybody eat grain. What happens to the animals who have eaten grain that's been treated with Roundup?
All of those animals that are in confinement, the massive production factories, they're fed these mixtures that incorporate the soy and the corn and waste material from a whole bunch of other things. But they are fed lots of this genetically modified grain. I mean, that's why they grow a lot of it, I think, is to go into the livestock feed.
Right.
So it's causing a whole range of different problems in the livestock. One of the things that they're seeing is the livestock are having problems reproducing. They're having problems getting the animals pregnant. They're having problems having them carry their pregnancies forward to birth. It's just causing a lot of reproductive problems for the livestock.
What happens in the digestive systems of either farm animals or human beings from this? I mean, the gut bacteria are absolutely necessary.
Yes.
And I've read that genetically modified crops interfere with the bacteria that we have in our guts that we need for digestion and health.
Unfortunately, this is one of those things that really has been not studied. absolutely inadequately studied. There is only one human feeding study that I'm aware of. And they took several volunteers who had a bag, a colostomy bag.
Yeah.
Their digestive system had gotten messed up, and they had a bag that basically collected their digestive material after it passed through. So they were able to look at it. And they fed these people a soy burger and a soy milkshake, genetically modified soy. Okay? But they actually looked at the material in their colostomy bags before they gave them the soy foods, and they found that the bacteria in their digestive systems had already got the DNA section from the genetically modified soy in their gut bacteria. 3 out of the 7 people already had that DNA section from the GMO soy.
Even before they were fed.
Even before they fed them the food.
Yeah.
Right? That means that it was already there from some previous time when they had eaten genetically modified soy, and it continued to function. We don't know how long it will continue to function. We don't know if the BT, the gene for the BT toxin has transferred to our gut bacteria. They don't study it. But if it has, then our gut bacteria could be pesticide factories, possibly forever. We don't know. But again, it's not studied.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people with concern for their health as well as for the environment and so forth have switched from eating meat to becoming vegetarians. And a lot of vegetarians have switched to eating soy. And you're saying that soy is one of these food crops that is overwhelmingly
Genetically modified,
majority of it is GM. And more people seem to be getting allergic to soy. I mean, the last few decades, I've been seeing a lot of people, just various friends, have a lot more kinds of food allergies. And soy allergy is really on the rise.
It's a real problem.
Is there a connection?
Yeah. One study was done where they did a skin scratch test. That's an allergy test. And they compared GM soy and non-GM soy. And this man was only allergic to the GM soy. He didn't react to the non-GM soy. There are several different ways that the GM soy can contribute to increases in allergies. There's a big increase in the allergen trypsin inhibitor. So a known allergen increased in amount. Trypsin inhibitor depresses trypsin, which is an enzyme, a digestive enzyme. So the increased amount of this trypsin inhibitor in the GM soy suppresses digestion. When you suppress digestion, then the food in your gut stays there longer undigested. The longer you have undigested food in your digestive system, the more likely it is to respond to it with an allergy, right? So it's like decreasing the digestion increases the problems with allergy. There's also higher levels of herbicide residues, so we can react to the herbicide itself. And then the Roundup Ready protein itself, the protein that makes the plant resistant to the Roundup, that's also got properties of known allergen, so it can be causing problems there. And then there's this whole potential of it transferring to the gut bacteria. So all of those things have the potential to increase the problems with allergy for GM soy.
Well, and also if it's interfering with digestion, you're not picking up the nutrients that you need for good nutrition.
That's happening all over the place.
And so people would end up with being with nutrient deficiencies.
Yes.
Because nature can't do its thing properly.
And there's another thing affecting our digestion. So the BT toxin, right? So we're getting the BT toxin in these foods, right, that produce all this BT toxin. BT toxin just, breaks up the digestive system. That's how it kills the insects. Right? They eat the BT. Eat the plant. The BT toxin destroys their digest. So how many people are having digestive problems?
Yeah. So maybe what it does to the insects, it does to us as well. And there's been a big increase in people who have all kinds of digestive problems in recent years. And now, the increase in when GM foods started relatively just a few decades ago.
1996 is when they became.
And then it's escalated since then.
Dramatically. There's so much more of it. It's just
a lot of health problems take a while to develop. I mean, if you can smoke 2 packs a day of cigarettes and not get cancer right away, but overall the odds are against you. And a lot of other health problems take a while to develop. it may be, it just seems to me like we'd be seeing a big escalation of disease and dysfunctional medical functioning in later years that we haven't seen yet.
Let's look at an example where they identified a genetically modified product that caused a problem in people, and then we'll look at why that was discovered as being a problem.
Oh, yeah.
So you remember when L-tryptophan was a popular supplement? And then back in the 80s, there was a big problem with it, okay? There was one, and then they banned it, actually, for over-the-counter sale. There was one company in Japan that was using genetically modified bacteria to make the L-tryptophan. And that was probably the source of whatever contaminant that caused a lot of people to die and thousands more to become sick, and some of them are permanently disabled. So this L-tryptophan, they identified it as being from this one particular source that had been genetically modified. So why were they able to figure that out? The only reason why they were able to determine what the source was, that it caused new symptoms, something that hadn't been seen before, and that those symptoms were really acute, and they came on quickly. So all those things together, these people got really, really sick, and they went to a hospital or a doctor. It required all of that. If they had been something that was kind of slow acting, or something that they already had, or something that's common. So it's like if it was heart disease, or if it was irritable bowel cysts, you know, or asthma, you know, something that's pretty common in our society, they might never have noticed that it was associated with this particular product.
So what could people do about this? I mean, it's like it's easy to feel like, holy crap, all this danger's around me, and it's in the food. And how do we protect ourselves?
Naturally, once people are aware that there's a potential problem, they want to do something to avoid it. Fortunately, it's possible to avoid it. When you eat food that is certified organic, it is supposed to be sourced from ingredients that are non-genetically modified. You want to make sure you're buying products from a company that you trust, because the organic label has been found to be something that really increases the profits. So sometimes companies say it's organic when it's not actually certified organic.
Yeah, there's all kinds of law about labeling is not to be taken seriously. I mean, you can say anything you want in your advertising and on your labeling, unless you're actually violating a certified limitation. You know, like if it's certified organic, that's good, but just to say like all natural is
pretty meaningless.
Yeah.
So now, in addition to certified organic, there is a standard, there's something called the non-GMO project. And if you have a project that has a label that says it's non-GMO project verified, then that company has actually paid to have that product tested and in this certification program that shows that it is having less than a certain amount of genetically modified ingredients.
And people can see that label, that thing on their TV screen right now.
Yes.
Even as we speak. That's good. So that's something to do. So, and also I would guess you'd want to avoid the high risk foods.
Yes.
Watch out for corn and soy and cottonseed oil and canola, because the vast majority of all of those four are genetically modified, and also a lot of sugar beets.
Those are going to be pretty obvious. Okay, I'm going to talk about the non-GMO shopping guide. So here's a non-GMO shopping guide. This is something that is made by the Institute for Responsible Technology.
Yeah, a great nonprofit group that's done the best work of anybody in publicizing.
Yes, and so this lists the products that have been non-GMO project verified. There's a variety of different categories. There's another thing about this brochure. Inside the back cover, there is a list of all of the ingredients that are likely to be genetically modified. So the forms of hidden soy and corn are on the inside cover of this guide.
Right, because the ingredient could be listed under some different name.
Yes.
And people don't realize, oh, this is an ingredient that's actually made with corn or made with soy.
For example, hydrolyzed protein or textured protein, those are forms of soy.
Yeah.
And then forms of corn are like maltodextrin, cyclodextrin, you know, just a whole range of different
Yeah, and you wouldn't know
things.
that if you didn't have that. And that's available for free. I actually went to the website of the Institute for Responsible Technology.
It's downloadable for free.
Yeah.
They also have a smartphone app for it now.
Okay.
Where you can just pull out your phone and just look it up when you're in the store.
Okay. Interestingly, in November 2013, people in Washington State will be able to actually vote for a labeling requirement. There's an initiative 522 where people can actually vote on that. So there will be information around pro and con increasingly as we get closer to the November election. So people can study up on that and figure out what you can believe and what you can't believe as the pro and side. Because I've visited the website on each side.
Labeling allows you to know whether or not genetically modified ingredients are in your food.
Yeah. There are some corporations that make a lot of money from GM foods, and they have some arguments against labeling. They say, oh, it's going to make your food cost more, your groceries cost more. Do you have a response to that allegation?
These manufacturing companies change their product labels all the time. Low, salt.
New and improved.
New and improved, low fat,
Yeah.
splash somebody's picture on the front. Yeah. So it doesn't really increase the cost of the food to change the label itself.
Yeah, they do that all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they also say, testing is going to raise the cost of. The labeling requirements are not going to require testing of each individual product, because that's what would raise the cost. So requiring labeling is not going to make a substantial increase in the cost of your packaged foods. And actually, when companies get their products non-GMO project verified, and have this label on their foods, they find that their sales of those products dramatically increases, and their profits actually go up when they become verified.
You and I have a mutual friend who was visiting in England recently, and she went to a store and bought a breakfast cereal made by one of the big U.S. companies, and throughout the European Union, they prohibit genetically modified foods. And so out of curiosity, she went there to see what it would cost to buy this cereal that's the same as what they have here, except she knows that it has no GM ingredient, and she said the cost was about the same.
Yes, it's the same.
Translate the currency.
The only ones who benefit financially from the use of the genetically modified ingredients is the companies that manufacture the genetically modified ingredients and then the chemicals that get sprayed on them.
Yeah.
There's no difference in taste, no difference in quality in any respect. There's no consumer benefit.
Yeah.
There's nothing in it that's good for us.
Yeah.
Those companies know how to make the foods without the GMO ingredients already, but those same companies sell products with GMOs here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they know how to do it already.
And there's no benefit to us.
No.
That's the thing, is that they make profits on it. There's no benefit to us.
It doesn't keep better, it doesn't taste better, there's no texture difference.
Right. Now, in recent years, more and more people have been figuring out the stuff that we're talking about here during this hour, and they've become concerned and better informed. Why do you think the movement for genetically modified food awareness and alternatives has grown so much in the last couple of years?
I think it's because of very pointed efforts to educate more people. I didn't really know anything about genetically modified foods myself before. I just kind of had heard that they were bad, but I didn't know any of the specifics. And then I did the training in giving these presentations, and I suddenly became much more aware. And since the time I did that training a couple of years ago, there's been a dramatic increase in awareness of it. And I think a lot of that is because Jeffrey Smith kind of got this push going to educate people and train people to give these presentations.
And he's the starting point for this Institute for Responsible Technology.
Yes.
And they're a good outfit. They're at www.responsibletechnology.org, and they have lots of information there. It's a very, very good website, very informative, and actually easy to understand. I mean, you can understand just like people can understand the stuff you've been explaining. Let me mention a couple of the sources of information, because that's one. So Institute for Responsible Technology, www.responsibletechnology.org. And they have videos and they have printed materials at the website, great stuff. Jeffrey Smith, whom you mentioned, has done a lot of videos and writings, including the book Genetic Roulette, which is a great title.
If you want to understand the science, he goes into much more detail than I did today. If you want to understand the science and the studies that have been done, that's an excellent, excellent book that's easy to read a little bit at a time.
Okay.
Their website also has a lot of online audios and videos.
Yeah.
And if you want to go and get one of those that you like, you can send a link to it to your friends and family so that other people can start to become a little bit educated.
Good, good. There's also www.nongmoproject.org and www.nongmoshoppingguide.com, which is what you showed us here. And then look for the label, which you've identified on the screen. So that's all great stuff. I want to thank our guest, Sandra Lee. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. Foods that have had their genes modified or engineered provide huge profits to a few giant business corporations. They do not provide any benefits to humans, but they do cause huge risks and dangers to our health and to the environment worldwide. In order for the free market to work, consumers need accurate information so they can make informed choices. Labels on food products already provide information about nutrition. Labels could also inform us about whether products contain genetically modified ingredients. So read information on all sides of the issue, make up your own informed mind. The Institute for Responsible Technology is an excellent source of information. Their website is www.responsibletechnology.org. And you can get information about a wide variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 360-491-9093 and www.olympiafor.org. You can also watch our TV programs through the TV program page at that website. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can make the world a better place, but we all have to do our part. And the world needs you. Thanks.
Organisms. They said that there was potential for new allergies, new toxins, new diseases, and new nutritional problems resulting from this whole genetic engineering technology. So they were very concerned. We're going to show as we go along some slides, some images that show you some of the lab animals that have been affected by the genetically engineered foods that they've been fed during the lab studies.
A starting point for this would be what people assume or believe about food. For example, a lot of people assume that if the government allows something to be sold, that it must be safe. And what would your response be to that assumption?
I have this fundamental belief that I suppose, that the government is going to take care of us, right? That if anything is going to be on the shelf available for us to buy, that it's going to be safe, that it's going to be something that we can eat and have it be something that is not damaging to us and to our health. I have come to a point where I no longer trust that. That trust has been broken for me, and I believe there are a lot of people out there who have educated themselves who, again, no longer have that trust or that faith.
So in recent years, you're not alone.
Yes.
There are more of us who are well-informed, who've looked into this, have lost that assumption, as you have. And people have lost faith in the food industry. Is there anything else you could say about this, about that loss of trust?
I think it's a real problem. I mean, the average person out there who doesn't know about the things that are going on with all of this, they just go around buying their food as they always have, not aware that there is a potential problem with it. But now more and more people are starting to be concerned and educating themselves and other people about this. So people are more informed now.
And they'll be even more informed at the end of this hour.
We hope so.
There's something called the precautionary principle. Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For more than 26 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. In recent years, more and more people have become concerned that giant corporations are doing things to food that we eat that are bad for our health, bad for agricultural animals, and bad for the environment. A few giant corporations are tampering with the genetic makeup of food, crops such as corn and soy especially. They are splicing into these food crops some genes from totally different species, sometimes splicing genes from bacteria into plants to kill weeds or to make plants grow faster. The changed crops are referred to as genetically modified, GM, or genetically engineered, GE. Scientists are increasingly warning us of the dangers of this. While some aspects of the science are detailed, ordinary people can easily understand the basic facts. I'm delighted to welcome Sandra Lee as our guest for the next hour. Sandra is a scientist with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. For several years, she has been educating herself about genetically modified organisms. She's skilled at explaining the science clearly in ways that ordinary folks can understand. Sandra is providing some visual images to illustrate the facts that she'll be sharing with us during this hour. Welcome, Sandra. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Glenn.
And I'm glad we finally get to address this topic. It's been on my list of topics I wanted to get to for some time, and I'm glad we're doing it now. Later in this interview, we'll talk some more about dangers that genetically modified foods cause for human health. But first, could you give like an overview of some of the dangers so viewers will see the scope of the problems?
The United States Food and Drug Administration has developed an official policy about genetically modified foods, but before they did that, the scientists at the FDA expressed real concerns about the potential for dangers associated with genetically modified organisms. In my opinion, there's been enough to prove that it's not safe, because again, there's more than one study showing that it's dangerous. But unfortunately, there aren't a lot of safety studies required. In my opinion,
Not required by the government.
there should be requirements for safety studies done before these things are approved, and after they're out in the market, they should continue to be studied. But none of those safety tests are required.
Yeah. Some of the best research and explanation of what's going on comes from a nonprofit group called the Institute for Responsible Technology, and I've read their stuff and appreciate very much what they're doing. Jeffrey Smith had started this. He wrote a book called Genetic Roulette, and
Yes.
we'll have the website and information at the end of the program in the credit. Among other things, they expose how the genetically modified food industry rigs its own scientific research to distort the results. Can you tell us how that works?
I want to clarify. The Institute for Responsible Technology doesn't actually do any research.
No, but
what they do is they gather information.
Yeah, they convey the information, yeah.
So the way scientific studies can be manipulated, you can come up with whatever result you want the study to show. You can cause the scientific experiment to be designed such a way that shows the result that you want it to show. And a lot of times what they also do is they manipulate the numbers. They manipulate the result after the studies have happened. Again, to show whatever it is that they want to show. So you can't really trust the studies that the industry does to show safety, because they're not wanting to prove that they're safe.
Right, they have a conflict of interest. They want to
Yes.
they want to be able to sell their stuff.
Yes.
So we need independent research.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Food and Drug Administration doesn't require.
That it's very useful in so many areas of modern life where science is saying, oh, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And the precautionary principle, can you describe what that is and how that is relevant to this topic?
The precautionary principle basically says, if you're going to change something, if you're going to do something new, do no harm. So if you are feeding your family and you know that something has the potential to cause damage to health, then it's like, oh, there's a potential for harm for that, so you're not going to do it. In a business that you own, if you're going to look at adopting a new policy, if it's going to have potential to cause harm, you're probably not going to implement that. So the precautionary principle basically says to do no harm with what you're doing.
Yeah, so don't do something if you can't anticipate what the outcomes are going to be.
Yes.
If it's, I mean, don't be like recklessly gambling if you don't know this is going to be safe.
And in our society, we count on scientific studies to be able to provide that evidence, to provide that proof.
Well, let's talk a bit about the scientific method then, because how do scientists work through the scientific method to figure out how the world works?
They come up with a hypothesis, something that they decide they want to prove, a theory that they have that they want to believe is true. And so they develop scientific experiments to test that assumption, to test that hypothesis. The way the scientific method works is if there is even one piece of evidence, one piece of scientific evidence showing that that hypothesis is false, then the whole hypothesis is false. Because if the hypothesis is true, then it has to be true in all cases. So we're going to see that there are examples of places where genetically modified foods have caused harm, which disproves that hypothesis that they're safe.
So has there been enough scientific experimentation to prove one way or another about the safety of genetically modified foods?